Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Tanzu Tuesdays. And this time, it's not just me as a host. We have a fairly new coworker. Her name is Whitney. So, hi, Whitney. Welcome to our team and welcome to Tanzu Tuesdays.
Thanks for having me.
And
I was going to say, I hope to be doing this for many, many weeks to come, hanging out with you on Tuesdays.
This is your first stream with us.
It is. I think I'm blushing a little.
All of I can't really tell. It'll be nice to not be the solo person running this going forward.
Excellent.
Having someone around as well besides our lovely speakers. But yeah, so next week, we don't have the talks up yet. That one is actually still a little bit of a work in progress, but we'll have a talk next week. And all our stuff is on tanzu.tv/TT for Tanzu Tuesdays. And then the week after that, we are actually taking a break. And then we'll be back after that. Yeah, so today we have Nate Schutta, who's also awesome and on our lovely developer advocacy team.
Good afternoon, friends. Hello.
Hi, Nate.
Hi.
I like your backdrop. It's very pretty. Where is that?
Thank you. I don't know exactly where in the great state of Minnesota this is, but I felt it was good to throw something out here that was more representative of my state than my very messy office.
Yeah, I did the exact same thing, you know, I never know the right direction. Yeah, Rainier, there we go. Instead of my variety of multivitamins and other junk that is behind my green screen. You can't see it's not there, right?
My backdrop is the messy, basically for my wallpaper, I tried to choose something that looks like actual wallpaper. And so when I needed to choose an image real quick for my backdrop, this is what you got. This is what I look at behind my work every day.
Well, when we first hopped on, though, I actually thought that was literally behind you. I didn't realize that it wasn't just art in your house. So there you go. Kudos, the system works.
It's not unlike the crazy art I put in my house.
Yeah, whereas our backgrounds, it's obviously that we're floating. OBS is struggling harder with my edges.
I wonder why that is. I wonder why your edges are more difficult to understand than my edges. It's a subtle bragging.
I see how it is. I mean, clearly you're just better than me. But it's also OBS versus Zoom. So 2 different softwares going at it.
Right on. So when you
I just apparently have sparkly invisible hair.
When you pointed out TT is Tanzu Tuesday, I think we missed an opportunity for the Tiffany alliteration too.
Oh,
a TTT. Yeah. Or in the tech world, you'd be T3.
Tiffany's Tanzu Tuesdays.
Yeah. Technology.
Technology on Tanzu Tuesday with Tiffany. How many other T's can we throw into this?
I guess 4.
Time to be somewhere in there.
I guess 4, because we all got quiet when we were thinking.
Tanzu Tuesday time with, I don't know.
Tiffany, yep. Tanzu Tuesday time with Tiffany, Tech Talks. There we go. We're getting there. We'll keep workshopping. Maybe that could be an Olympic sport.
Tanzu Tuesday Tech Talk with Tiffany is amazing.
This is the content people come to.
Whenever I do. I feel like that's what will be needed when whenever I do a talk on here again.
There you go. That should just be the title of your presentation. Technical talk on Tanzu Tuesday with Tiffany today.
Hold a teddy bear.
There you go.
Or a truck.
12 o'clock.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, I didn't think of that. You're right. It is also noon. 12. Yeah.
We're crushing this.
Yeah.
See, this reminds me of
what happens when you're stuck at home for too long.
Yeah, but it reminds me of this random game that my wife and I used to play when we were commuting. if you're stuck in traffic, you pick a letter in somebody's license plate, and then you have to come up with as many words as possible that start with that letter. There's also, you could take, if you've got like 3 letters, you could say, okay, it's got to be those 3 letters in a row, or it has to contain those. And you get into some really interesting battles around, did you already say that? Oh, but what if I put ed at the end of it, or I make it plural? And yeah, it's the things we used to do to amuse ourselves, before we had podcasts. You guys remember commutes? I don't remember commutes. So but I'm vaguely recalling having done that with Christine.
At first it sounded really fun until you got into the part where you're splitting hairs about the way you define what's a match or not.
I mean, I think we were pretty liberal in our interpretation, unless it meant that one of us was going to lose. And then it was, if you had more words, then it's fine. I'll give you that one. But if you're out of words, like, no, you can't do that. So.
Sounds vicious.
Yeah.
There
was a while where I was like going back and forth with Oregon and Seattle. So I definitely had those. That was the commute, and just listen to music that was attached to like my first gen iPhone.
Nice. That's fun when you lose the iPhone, or in my case, an iPod, and then you find it again. And it's like this time capsule of music you listen to at this certain moment, 2001. Yeah. And
I want to be able to get the music off of it. I need to figure out how to do that. Like get it back into, I don't know if it's, I haven't looked in a while, but there's a point in time where I was trying to like just put it back into iTunes and I couldn't do that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the fun thing is trying to explain to a teenager that this used to be a very high-tech musical device that they just do not comprehend. And that's all it did. Like, yep, just played music. Like, you mean like my phone? Like, yeah, but it didn't have any of that other stuff. So
yeah,
like my Zune.
Ooh, you had
my
a Zune?
Still works.
Yeah.
Wow. I saw one joke that someone said, I use a Zune as a case around my iPod because then no one will steal it.
Oh my gosh. I think I've seen that too, but that's depressing. I don't know.
Wait, did you have the chocolate brown Zune? Because brown was the new whatever in color when the Zune came out. Did you have
my
the brown
brother
one?
had the poop colored one, and I say poop color because not only was it brown, the outside clear-ish rim is green.
Oh.
I had the white one.
Okay. All right, that makes more sense. Yeah.
I guess my brother broke the brown one, and then he ended up with a cool red one that I think also stopped working. Like
sure.
Every single Zune my brother touched stopped working.
So don't let him touch the Zune is what you're saying.
Yeah. Like my dad got me one of the nicer ones afterward because he worked at Microsoft and it had like the little touch scrolly thing instead. And I'm like, I don't need this. My other one still works. But now they both still work. So.
And now they just take up space in your house and life.
Well, that's why we have a junk drawer.
Yeah, for your Zunes, just a Zune drawer.
Yes, for all your old technology, that's where it goes to die. All the old chargers that you probably should just throw away, but you're like, I don't know if I still have the thing.
I totally have a bag of cords that I don't know what they belong to, but just in case I need them later.
The second you get rid of them is when you're like, oh, dang it, I needed one that does this to that, and I know I had one, and I get rid of it.
But
that's what happened on my trip that I was just on, where I couldn't find my camera, like actual charging pack thing, and I was like, oh, I can just use my micro USB charger, and then I'm like, wait, this is bigger than micro. That old. Okay.
But anymore, you should just get rid of everything. I just moved and I'm in a real purgy kind of mood. Like anyone compliments any of my furniture or anything, I'm like, do you want to keep it? You can have it. Just take it away. And so I'm like, with this bag of cords when I packed it up, I packed it saying, if I don't use any of them by the time the move is ended, I'm just going to get rid of all of them. Because with like, you can get a cord delivered to you in a few hours if you really, really need it. And if I haven't used it for years, I probably also am not going to need it with a time sensitive in any sort of time sensitive way.
So you're saying it didn't spark joy.
I need to do purging.
Thank it. Let it go.
Yes. Marie Kondo.
I need to do that. I have stuff from Oregon.
Yeah.
I have stuff from multiple moves that have stayed in the boxes.
Yeah.
No, I can totally relate to that. We moved into this house and a whole bunch of stuff ended up in the basement where it just went and you just didn't have to deal with it because it was in the basement. And then when we finished the basement a couple of years ago is when we finally had to go through and go, do we really need this anymore? No, probably not. Okay, let's get rid of it. So yeah, it's always fun.
There's some things with sentimental value that I kind of made this morbid joke to my son that like, okay, I'm gonna pack it up in a box, I'm gonna put it in the attic, and then when I die, you can throw it away.
Oh my gosh.
I don't want to throw it away, but I know nothing's gonna happen.
This would be yours to throw away, son. This is my legacy to you.
On that note, just wanted to like switch gears real quick and remind people that Spring 1, our spring conference, is coming up in basically a little under a month. You can just go to spring1.io. There's stuff to do with like Spring itself, but then there's things around like Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry and other things like that. It's free. It'll be online, probably, obviously, at this point. So yeah, just go and sign up for that. And I think we should let you do your talk now, Nate.
Well, so I should add that I may have actually been working on the architecture schedule this morning. So, you know, I can confirm that the things are starting to come together for that in terms of getting everything actually officially scheduled, which is always fun to try to slot everything in and get that all timed out right. And, you know, then wait, did we do the math correct? And well, if we put this talk here, when should we put this talk? And yeah, it's fun, especially when you're like, oh, hang on, I think that person's in EMEA, so let's not have them go at 4.
I had the thing of like, oh, hey, we should do this person. Like, I just looked and they're in India. That's a terrible time.
Yeah, it's really, really hard to thread all those needles, but you know, we do our best. So anyway, well, in theory, I'm sharing my screen. So I think what I'm gonna do, I'll leave the chat open if you guys want to interrupt me at some point here, if anybody has questions, but I'll go ahead and dive in. And then I think at the end, we do need to touch at least briefly on the Olympics, because I've really enjoyed trying to reverse engineer the rules of these somewhat obscure sports. So I think there's some interesting material there that we can discuss on Technical Talk Tuesday with Tiffany. All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about this whole CI/CD game and sort of how that's changed over my career. You know, I've been doing this software thing for a while, and you know, back in the beginning, it was fairly straightforward. You know, I had a monolith, maybe I had 2 monoliths, and you'd release it semi-annually, maybe 4 times a year. We all worked on the same floor, and if we weren't all on the same floor, I could easily walk over to your area, but that's just not the world we live in today. There's a pretty good chance you don't have 1 or 2 monoliths. You probably got dozens of services, maybe hundreds of services. Maybe you don't even know how many services because there's so darn many of them. New versions come out every time you turn around, and of course we are global, as we just said, trying to figure out how to get a schedule put together that works for people that are in a bunch of different time zones. Kind of hard, kind of challenging. Now, building applications has never been an easy thing. It's never been simple, but you combine these massively distributed apps with geographically dispersed teams, it presents a whole new set of challenges to us. And so the moral of the story is our approach has to evolve. We can't just keep doing things the way we have in the past. And I am adamantly of the opinion that the most dangerous 6 words we can possibly say is, that's how we've always done it. And I've run into that throughout my career, and it's the most frustrating answer to get because it's not a very satisfying answer. So how did we get here? You know, we don't do a good job of discussing our history in this industry, which really is to our own detriment because we have a tendency to repeat a lot of those same mistakes from the past. So software development is often a very siloed experience. And I remember being on waterfall projects. In fact, I think my wife is technically on a waterfall project right now. And you're in this situation where, you know, one phase flows into the next, and it has a reassuring concept to it, right? At least in theory, it's supposed to work really well. You gather all the requirements, you do the design, you build it, you test it, and then it goes into the maintenance phase. Now, I remember early in my career, someone explained to me that the software development lifecycle, the place code lives the longest is maintenance. You start thinking, well, actually, don't we just mean product? Isn't that really what we're talking about? We're going to continue to invest in this thing. And, you know, I guess that worked for some definition of worked. But of course, during this era, our teams were very separated. It makes me think of a proverbial bento box where, you've got the BAs, they're doing their thing, telling developers what to do. And then we argue with testers and operators and infrastructure folks. And there's just a little dash of UI in there to make it all look nice. And just to put it politely, we didn't always get along. We didn't always work well together. There's often animosity between groups. And in some instances, maybe most instances, it was borderline trench warfare. And of course, in this era, all of our handoffs were one way. I hand it to you, and then you hand it to someone else. And this was often a heavily scheduled sort of process. And it was only done a few times a year. Or to put it another way, well, I'm just going to throw it over the wall to QA. It's QA's problem now. Or throw it over the wall to the operators. It's their problem now. And again, I guess that kind of worked, except not very well. And this tweet always just makes me laugh, watching someone trying to break this hunk of glass. I don't know why you'd want to break a piece of glass like that, but, just throw a sledgehammer. When in doubt, get the sledgehammer. That does tend to solve any number of problems. Now, of course, there was a lot of finger pointing during this era of software. And I know I've uttered many of these phrases, but it was very common for us to say, well, hey, it works as designed. Don't blame me. And of course, to our poor QA people, we'd usually say unable to reproduce. And then our operators would look at us and say, hey, you brought down prod again. Now, it should be pretty obvious. This is not exactly an ideal way to work. I remember being on a lot of these projects where our cycle times were measured in astronomical units, and it was a very slow, plodding, almost turtle-like experience. Although I guess if this was what my morning commute was like, I wouldn't be in a hurry either. So maybe the turtle has it right and we have it wrong. As a total aside, I was driving home from the golf course the other day, and I saw the largest turtle I've ever seen trying to cross the road. And I thought, boy, I don't know if I want to get out and help this creature because it'll probably bite my hand off. It was a big, big turtle. I've seen plenty of baby ones, but this thing was, this was a large animal. This was almost the size of like a garbage can lid. Now, the world doesn't stand still. That's the one constant in our era is change is going to happen. And so unsurprisingly, business cycles have sped up and we've had to adapt to that. We've had to embrace this always be changing mindset. For a lot of my career, it seemed like the default estimate was 18 months. We'll get to that in 18 months. That just doesn't work today. We need to be able to turn things around in days or weeks, not months, not years. And I remember the first Spring One I was at as an employee, a gentleman from Scotiabank gave this presentation talking about their journey from the traditional quarterly release cycle to thousands of deploys a month. And I was talking to some of my former colleagues and they're like, oh, geez, Nate, we can't ever do this. And I said, well, why not? And they said, well, you've worked with us for years. We can't do that. And I said, well, dude, if a bank can do this, banking tends to be a pretty heavily regulated industry. If they can make this change, so can you. Now, it's very clear that this doesn't happen overnight. And Scotiabank, this took time. This is the kind of thing that can take years to fully adapt. And, it's a culture shift. It's a technology shift. It's embracing a new way of doing things. It's not the kind of thing we decide on a Tuesday, let's do 1,000 deploys. And then by Thursday, you've done 900. That just isn't how it works. It takes time. Now, whether it's convenient for us or not, speed matters today. We have to be more responsive. This environment is rapidly evolving and every industry has been impacted by disruption. No industry is immune from this. I think this was a real wake-up call when Amazon bought Whole Foods and now a whole bunch of grocery stores went, oh, wow, we are technology companies, or at least we're competing with a technology company. We might need to change our way of doing business. I spent a lot of my career in the insurance industry. And I can tell you that some companies do view Google as a competitor because Google's all about managing information and building these models. And that's kind of what insurance is at the core. Now, whether it's convenient or not, we're all technology companies. And I would say that's probably the most fundamental shift I've seen in my career. I remember right out of school, a CIO gave this presentation where he was very adamant that all us new employees, we're not working at a technology company. No, friends. You're at a financial services company. We are a cost center. We are here to support the business. If you are looking to be a software company, you have made a terrible life decision. Go work somewhere else. Now, fast forward 20-ish years, I was at another client. Their CIO got up and gave a completely different presentation. He said, listen, we are a technology company that happens to be in retail. And I think that right there pretty much encapsulates the shift that we've seen over the last couple of decades. So what does that mean for us as technologists? What do we do about that? And then we kind of ponder a little bit. And of course, in most instances, if you ask a software engineer, hey, how can we make this better? How do we improve this, software engineer? Their answer is, let's make it look more like software engineering, of course. That's the proverbial, I got to have more cowbell. That's the answer to all my problems. Just give me more cowbell. And so this started for many of us with this approach to testing. We're like, well, testing's not quite working the way we'd hope it to. How can we change that? Well, you know what? Let's make testing look more like software engineering. Sure, that makes sense. We'll say developers are responsible for writing automated unit tests, and that will free our testing professionals up to really push the applications into unique and interesting ways, to be summed up quite well by this tweet. This tweet just literally made me laugh out loud. QA engineer walks into a bar, orders a beer, orders 0 beers, orders 9 trillion beers, orders a lizard, orders -1 beers, orders jam on keyboard. First real customer walks in, asks where the bathroom is, and the bar bursts into flames, killing everyone. So I just brilliant tweet. Now, of course, we can take the same approach and we can look at our production folks and be like, well, what should we do about that? And of course, their typical reaction is, LOL, you're kidding, right? That's not my problem. And even if it were, hey, it works on my box. I actually had a friend once who made stickers up that said, WOMB on it. And if you uttered that in a meeting, he'd slap that on your laptop. And it was not meant as a badge of honor. He was trying to shame you into never saying that. So what do we do about that? Well, traditionally just throw it over the wall. Let's let production deal with it. Now, as a parent of a teenager, it occurs to me that, think if that's how we parented. Kid reaches a certain age, kid's 5. Hey, they're the world's problem now. Nothing I can do about it. And besides, worked in my house. So our operators, they want to keep production up and running. That is their incentive. This is how they are typically rated. This is how they get evaluated. And often they look at us and say, hey, developer folks, all you do is write bugs, bring prod down. I don't like that. You know what? What'll give me 100% uptime? Just don't ever release code. Then I'll have 100% uptime and I'll get a big bonus. Now, obviously they couldn't quite get away with that, but they just did everything they could to make it really, really hard for us to release software. So how do we solve that problem? Well, it should be obvious. Give me more cowbell. Let's make ops look more like software engineering. And so now we're going to make developers responsible for that first line of production support. And unsurprisingly, when you are presented with the incentive of you're the one who's going to get paged at 3 a.m, well, maybe I'm going to try to write that software to be a little more reliable this time. I might put in some extra stuff to make sure that it isn't quite as crazy as what I maybe have done before. I might think a little more, maybe do a little more testing, feel a little more confident. Now, I've obviously oversimplified this quite a great deal, but whether it's convenient or not for us today, we have to be in this situation of being able to release more often. And what this allows us to do is get these nested feedback loops. I mean, this is really the core of, I would say, what we mean by agile development, get these nested feedback loops so we can adapt, which, by the way, is how we do everything. We just don't think of it that way. If you're driving to the grocery store to get your favorite lunch item, you don't just sort of point your car in the direction of the grocery store and floor it and close your eyes and hope for the best. You're constantly adjusting. You're changing your speed, you're changing lanes, you're adjusting to traffic or road conditions. And we don't think anything of it, yet that's a very compressed nested feedback loop. And so the beauty of this is it allows us to demonstrate progress, to show real people, hey, is this what you were thinking? No, more like this. It's like if you were going to an eye exam, better, worse, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's always fun. Now, that of course isn't our only feedback loop here though. We also have the feedback loop between us and ops, and it allows us to reduce some of that friction as well. And so our operators can work with us to say, hey, if your code had some more fault tolerance baked into it, that'd be a huge win for us. We'd have greater availability. We'd be able to handle some of these unexpected things. It also encourages us to work in smaller batch sizes, which really truly does give us less risk. Now, I've spent most of my career doing these giant quarterly releases. And I don't think anybody ever enjoyed that. You knew going into it that it was going to be a bad weekend. Cancel all your plans, be ready to get up at 3 a.m. You're either going to get locked in a windowless conference room or be on a telephone line the entire weekend. It's not anybody's idea of enjoyment. And of course, what would happen? Something would break and you'd sit there and go, what caused the break? I don't know. There were 1,500 changes, and it probably wasn't any one individual change. It was how these 3 changes that seemed completely unrelated, but they interact in a way that we'd never predicted. If I put one thing into production and I changed one thing and it broke, it makes it a lot simpler to do the reverse engineering. Much like as I hinted at earlier, I've enjoyed watching the Olympics because it's given me an opportunity to reverse engineer some of these sports and try to figure out, I wonder why that's a foul, or why isn't that a foul, or how many points is that worth? It's been very interesting to try to reverse engineer the scoring. So this also allows us to run experiments, to try things out, to do A/B testing, to be far more responsive to our business partners. And that's huge for us because it allows us to turn things around more quickly. It means we have typically a higher quality production environment as well. And it ultimately gives us better software, which delivers more business value. That's really what this is about, getting code into production that's solving some business problem, doing something faster, cheaper, whatever it happens to be. And that's going to make for happier customers. That's a good thing for us. Now, I'm very much of the opinion that software has become a much more collaborative game, and that's a good thing. That's a win for us. I remember in college, the sort of lone developer was still kind of in existence. I remember one summer working as an intern, and we had one of those lone developers, and I was writing documentation and kind of testing and whatnot. And anytime I'd run into something, I'd go talk to him, and I don't think he ever looked at me like face to face. He'd always kind of like look over his shoulder, and I'd explain it to him, like, okay, I think I know what's going on. Just not the way it works today. We have to be more collaborative and work together to solve these problems. It also allows us to align accountability. And this is part of where these trench warfare has traditionally come from in the past, is you keep bringing down production, don't make changes. Yeah, but I need to make changes to make my customer happy. And back and forth we went. This is where having an error budget can be so powerful for us. So we can establish a target for availability, for instance. And so we might decide that what we're looking for is 2 nines of availability. That means I have an error budget of 1%. Now, as a development team, I get to spend that however I want. I just can't go over that limit. So we're not trying to have 0 outages. 0 outages is impossible. The goal here is to stay within that error budget. So I know I've got a 1% buffer. And so I can experiment, I can try things out, I can see what happens if we do this. But once I start using up that budget, okay, I'm gonna have to take a step back, slow my roll a little bit. And now again, it aligns my incentives with my prod ops. It also helps us understand what are the real cost benefit trade-offs here. So traditionally, we've all been measured on our own sort of metrics. We get measured on velocity, ops get measured on uptime. Really, it should be bigger than that. And it should be, we are responsible for delivering business value to production. In other words, we own this. Now, I remember when I can't remember what grade I was when I read Grapes of Wrath, but the thing that really stood out to me was sort of that social metamorphosis that happens from the I to the we. And that's what we need to do in software, is get to this point of we are responsible for delivering this, and how do we work together to make that happen. So at the end of the day, the goal here should be, we want to get features and functionality production frequently, reliably, repeatably. How do we do that? We can't do it by hand anymore. We have to have a heavy, heavy dose of automation. Now, back in the day, builds were this Rube Goldberg machine with lots of manual tasks. I remember for part of my career, builds started with, well, you right click in your IDE, and then you copy this over to this magic drive location that's got some hard-coded, non-expiring username and password in it that's in clear text. Wink, wink, don't tell anybody. And you know what? That worked kind of for some definition of work. I knew it was an issue when I rolled off a team, and the person who was going to take it over for me, we were trying to figure out, well, how do we set it up so that Josh can do deploys? And working with the folks that ran our app servers, they're like, oh, we never really contemplated this scenario because it was hard coded to my ID. And so how do we switch it to Josh's ID? And that was like a multi-week process, which was just nuts to me. And, it was okay, I guess, because we just don't do it very often. So it's fine. We only do it a few times a year. Now, one of the superpowers of my team is that we will find the best coffee in whatever city we happen to be in. although I do desperately miss my coffee buddy, Mark. Although we actually, there was quite a Twitter thread already today about coffee. That's pretty much how this rolls for me. I have a new grinder that's going to show up sometime the next couple of days. I'm very excited for that. But anyhow, I love artisanal coffee and I will seek it out wherever I happen to be. And that's great. But you know what I don't want is artisanal builds. I don't want bespoke builds. I don't want artisanal infrastructure. The reality is human beings are not capable of doing the same thing twice. Watch the Olympics. It's amazing to me to watch these people who are world-class at what they do. I was a former thrower, former field athlete. And so I've really enjoyed watching the disc and the hammer. And you see these people that are throwing it just crazy distances. And then you watch and one goes way out there and then one goes 10 meters shorter. It's like, yeah, we're just not capable of doing the same thing twice. Now, if you don't believe me and you think I'm just lying to you, pick up golf as a hobby and then come back and let's talk. Whether we like it or not, we have bad days. We get bored. We skip a step. We fat finger a command. We, inadvertently send out the integration testing email to all of our subscribers. Computers don't do that. In computer science, there's ultimately only three numbers. I figured this out early in my career. There's really only three numbers we care about in computer science. There's something we do 0 times. There's something we do once and only once. And then there's N. If you do something more than once, get ready, you're going to do it 1 billion times. Anything you do more than once, you should think long and hard about how to automate it. And we should offload that toil to the computer and let the computer do it, because the computer will do it the same way every time. It will not get bored. It will not skip a step. It will not fat finger a command. We need consistency. There's just no getting around it. Again, I need reliable, repeatable. So what I really need are pipelines. I need CI and CD to make this happen. Now, we've written about this ourselves. If you want to see some of our thoughts on this, the GitHub folks are doing quite a bit in this area as well. I strongly recommend you take a peek at some of their things. Now, I want to stress this does not imply that I commit code and it is running in production 30 seconds later. Now, it can, but I don't know anybody that starts there. Now many of us have been doing CI for quite a number of years now. And this is just that realization that we want to merge code early, merge code often, because merge conflicts are painful. How many times have you been in that scenario? This is why for a number of years, we had locking files on our source code management, because I want to prevent Tiffany from getting in there and messing up this file. And of course, the downside is, well, I have it locked and I go on vacation and I forget to release my lock. And then, Tiffany's got to go around that and somehow unlock it, and all sorts of good stuff happens. We want to avoid merge hell. So what do we do with CI? Well, we want you to commit code as early and often as possible. Every time you commit code, this triggers some automated stuff to happen. We run some unit tests, some integration tests, run some code quality scans, linters, et cetera, whatever we think we need in order to feel comfortable that we haven't broken anything. So that anytime I make a commit, I have not broken the application. I'm in a releasable state all the time. Now, some organizations take that to the next step, which is continuous delivery. So now how do I get that release to my customers? So how do I take that same theory of automation and push it all the way through this deployment and release cycle? Now, it's important to understand that you are the one who decides how often you release to production. Now, I mean, not just you personally, it's your team, your customers, et cetera. But again, our goal is I want to be in a releasable state most of the time. Now, this also implies that I'm working in small batches, which again lowers the risk. As I mentioned earlier, these quarterly releases have typically contained hundreds or thousands of changes. And there's always these unintended consequences of these two changes had a really interesting impact that you didn't see in isolation, but now that they're together, oh, darn, everything breaks. What do we do about that? And so you'd sit there and go like, well, what change caused the break? And the only reasonable answer was, I have no idea. Now, again, if I push 1 or 2 changes to production, much simpler for me to figure out where I broke things. The other side of this that gets overlooked is, how do you get good at something? Well, repetition, of course. That's the only way you get better, is reps. This is something I've had to say to my son countless times. If you want to improve, you got to do it more often. If you only do something once or twice, there is no chance you're going to improve at it. None. So if we only deploy to production a few times a year, how can we ever get good at deploying to production? How do we have any idea where the rough edges are? What's our incentive to buff off those rough edges? So we want to deploy early and deploy often. This is one of those rare instances of, hey, it hurts when I do this, do more. And then you will make it hurt less. And you will improve. You will get better at it. By doing it often, we also develop trust. This process works. We know it works. We have done it thousands of times. We know that if something breaks, we can recover from that because we'll just push a new change and it's fine. We know we can get that to production, again, repeatably, reliably. Now, I mentioned this before, but there is no such thing as zero outages. That's just not possible. We're human beings. We deal in the real world. There are so many interesting interconnections now that, I don't know, all it takes is a DNS server goes down and half the internet goes with us. And this has happened at least twice that I can think of in the last couple of months, where something on the edge disappears and a whole bunch of stuff just stops working. Mistakes will be made. That's okay. Outages will happen. That's okay. Bugs will creep into the code. We're programmers. We're going to make mistakes. What we need to focus on is mean time to recovery. For so much of my career, it seemed like we would just pour concrete over the process. Now, I've been involved with some really heavyweight SDLCs. And if you take each one of those gates in isolation, they make sense. There's a good reason behind it. You know, we had this bad thing happen once. We don't want that bad thing to happen again. So we're going to make sure every project goes through this step. The problem, of course, is nobody ever talks about, well, what do we do if the bad thing still happens? Nobody ever audits the process to see, well, is that bad thing still happening? Does the step work? Is there a better way to do it? And again, the focus really needs to be on how do we recover? Because stuff's going to break. So how do we get that fix into production quickly, easily, reliably, repeatably? And again, it's all about the automation. That's what gives us confidence. I mean, just think to the last time you were in a word processor or any kind of text editor and you used undo. And can you imagine how hard it would be if you didn't have undo? I mean, just ponder for a moment what it would be like to develop software without version control. Every one of us has had that experience. We're like, oh, geez, this was working and now it's not. And oh, it's been a while since I've done a commit. Like, what do I do? You know, we all have that regret at some point in a given month, I think, where you just took too many steps without committing it. Oops. So we need robust pipelines. And there's a ton of great tools out there. Use whatever one makes you happy. You know, now a lot of these are cloud-based today. And some of this is baked into our source code management tools. You know, so if you've looked at all at GitHub Actions, that's part of what we're trying to do there. Again, shifting this stuff left. Now, that does lead to an interesting question about deployment strategies. This actually came up recently, and one of our colleagues tweeted out one of the websites she went to was down for maintenance. And my response was something to the effect of deployment strategies are not evenly distributed in the universe. But back in the day, the only strategy we had was nuke and pave. We're going to overlay the current version on top of the new version, or we're going to overlay the existing version with the new version, and, you know, fingers crossed, hope it all works out. You know, I'm pretty sure we caught everything. Guess we'll find out. Now, this almost always resulted in issues, breaks, bugs, late nights, sleepless nights. This was also why we had these wonderful windows of the application will now be down for maintenance for the next 48 hours. And by the way, when I see that today, it just drives me nuts. It's like, you got to be kidding me, right? There are better ways of doing it. Now, whether it's convenient for us or not, our customers' expectations have changed. Today, if our site is down, our customer will just go to our competitor. This is very true in the retail industry where, you know what, if I can't get it from you, I'll just, you know, there's zero friction in me entering another URL and I'll go there instead. And so this has evolved to this sort of recreate pattern, which is, okay, I'm going to spin down the current version, spin up the new version. Now, that has the advantage of being simple. Simple is good, but it means I'm going to have some long downtimes, which is just not ideal today. Now, I could do a rolling update, in which case a subset of instances, which we can define as a window size, are updated at a time. So maybe we do 2 servers at a time, work our way through the entire pool. This has the added benefit of, hey, there's no downtime here. But it also means that not everybody's getting the new version at the same time. So I need to be able to make sure the system can actually handle that scenario, and can be a real trick to roll back. And by the way, I also have to kind of maintain backwards compatibility. I got to start dealing with sticky affinity because it could be a real problem if a customer comes in on one version and then the next time they come in, they get a different version, and that might not be so great. So session management can be a real pain. So this tends to be a little more complicated than we'd like it to be. Now that has steadily evolved into blue-green deploys, which is something that Martin and others have talked about quite a bit. The idea being here is how do we try to automate this deployment process? And if you've ever read the continuous delivery book, you're well aware of these concepts. But the idea here is I have two identical deployment environments. And one is currently serving production traffic, we'll call that blue. And then I'm actively testing on my new version, we'll call that green. Once we reach a point where we're like, yeah, everything looks good, or I think I feel pretty comfortable with that. Sweet, let's switch the routing table. So now production points at green, and we're going to idle blue. Now, if it turns out after a couple hours, a couple of days, oops, there was some problem we discovered, we missed it, no problem. Let's just update the routing table. We point back to blue, cool. Now, if everything checks out, no problem. Blue now becomes our new staging environment, and then we just alternate back and forth. Now, one of the really interesting side effects of a blue-green deploy strategy is I am essentially testing my disaster recovery every single time I deploy. That's awesome, because one of the things that I very vividly remember, I mean, I remember a lot from 9/11, but in the aftermath of that is realizing that for many of our software systems, we had never done a true disaster recovery scenario before. We hadn't thought much about that. Like, well, how long can this application be down? When do we need to get this stood back up? And do we need to stand them up in a certain order to make sure everything sequences properly? And what happens if this system comes online before that system comes online? All sorts of new interesting edge cases popped up. Now, obviously, in this scenario, databases can be a challenge. Databases tend to be where a lot of our good ideas go to die, unfortunately. And so we do have to make sure that we've separated out those schema changes from application changes. But it does allow us to have that zero downtime experience, as well as a much simpler rollback experience, which does genuinely reduce our risk, which is a huge win. Now, it does cost us a little more because I'm essentially running two full versions of production, which is a bit of a problem. And I have to make sure, again, backwards compatibility can be a pain here. So I have to make sure I'm draining down transactions, before we do the full cutover. Now, there is a twist on this called red black. I would argue it's basically the same thing, but with different colors. Maybe it's a branding exercise. Now some would argue that blue-green does indeed or can have both versions serving traffic at the same time, whereas red-black says no, only one version serves traffic at a time. So perhaps red-black is a specialization of blue-green. Perhaps we're just being a little pedantic here. I don't know. And let me give one more thing, and then I will go to the question or statement that Whitney has for me here. This is my old boss, Andrew Clay Schaefer. This is one of my all-time favorite tweets. Who wants to argue about the definition of made-up words with me? We do that all the time. So I would say same concepts, different name. So Whitney, you have a question/statement for me.
Rex Roof says in our chat, I never understood how to separate schema changes from application changes.
Okay, that's the statement.
That's the statement.
So frankly, I would argue this is part of why we've evolved towards some of these schema-less databases, because they simplify some of those problems. And I'm the first to admit data is not my expertise. I've spent a lot of my career on the front end and sort of like getting data to the server. That's kind of the end of my job, and now like runs up a tree. There are techniques we have. There are, I think it's called flyweight, if memory serves, that allows me to do some of these concepts with databases that we've traditionally done with code. It just doesn't get the same level of love and attention that it deserves. There was a book in Martin's series, and I don't remember the exact title anymore, but I know that if the subtitle had been the real title, it would have probably been a good thing for all of us. But it was really about how do we refactor databases. And so it can be done. It's just something that we've traditionally sort of kicked the can down the street. It's like when your physics teacher said, ignore air resistance. We kind of do the same thing, unfortunately. What I will say in general, though, is we need to understand the consequence of this change. Some changes are pretty low risk, and so we might treat them differently than a higher risk change. So if we know we've got to do some real major changes to our database, we might go through more of a testing cycle. We might be a little we might spend more time, in sort of that deployment sequence as opposed to, cutting over, so we have to understand the consequences of the change and where that might ripple out, if that makes sense. So. All right, so that takes us to Canary Releases, which says, all right, we're going to test it in staging. If we feel good, then we're going to go to a Canary Release, which is real traffic and otherwise known as a canary in the coal mine, which means let's find out if we have an issue before we unleash 100% of our production workload onto this particular version. So some percentage, 5%, 10%, it can absolutely be a sliding scale up to 15, 20, 30, whatever makes you happy. And this is serving real traffic. These are real customers. This is not pseudo customers. This is not additional testing. This is real end users are banging on it. And if we do find an issue, fine, then just twist the knob back to 0. Now that does, of course, lead us to this interesting question of, well, how long should I be in Canary? And of course, the only answer I can give you is as long as it takes. That could be a couple hours. That could be a couple days. I don't know. The longer I do this, the more convinced I am that there are 3 answers that work for every question we've ever had in computer science. There's 42. That's to see who is well read. My favorite pattern as an architect is another layer of indirection. But the answer that I have to give more often than not is, well, it depends. It depends, sorry. Now, the advantage of a Canary release is it does allow us to do real tests with real production scenarios, except I'm not impacting everybody. So this does, again, give me 0 downtime. It does give me a much simpler rollback scenario, but I better have observability in place and I better understand what I'm seeing and be able to react to it. Now, this can also be very time consuming. And again, let's make sure we're being as backwards compatible as possible. And we are going to have to deal with sticky affinity and session management issues, and that can be a whole nother kettle of fish. Now, another part of this is this concept of A/B testing, and this is an incredibly common thing for us to do. And it turns out experiments are very common and very powerful. So what do? We have 2 or more potentially versions of this service running, and they're experiments. And so what are we doing? Well, we're testing our ideas. And so what does that mean? Some percentage of users are getting the experiment, some are getting our traditional version, and then we're doing a compare and contrast. Did this increase sales? Did this increase conversions? Did this decrease time to getting money? Whatever it is you care about. Again, we better have good observability in place here, and it is very easy to break an application doing this. Now, it should be pretty obvious. You could combine any number of these techniques together. You could do a rolling blue-green, a canary blue-green, and of course, that then leads to, well, which approach is right for you? Well, it depends. Moral of the story is do what's right for you. Do what's right for your app, for your situation. And yes, some apps are going to have different needs. So pick the approach that makes sense for this particular application and then automate it, and then automate some more. And we're done with that, do some more automation. Now, if you're having a hard time convincing the decision makers that, deployments matter and we need to put some time into this and, we need to do some automation and really invest in that, you may want to talk to them about the Knight Capital glitch. So this is the situation where essentially some zombie software tanked a trading company. They went out of business. And so what did it boil down to? Well, somebody repurposed an existing flag. They did a rolling deployment, except they missed a server. So 7 servers had the new code, 1 didn't. And it turns out this is not, in fact, fine. They lost 460 million and 75% of their market value in a blink of an eye. They were acquired a week later. The lesson here, you better have releases that are reliable and repeatable, and in no way, shape, or form rely on human beings to do the right thing, to do things perfectly. There is this adage in sort of early NASA that we don't need to work on some of these things because our astronauts are perfect, our astronauts don't make mistakes. It turns out they do. Automation is your friend. This is how we get a good night's sleep. And this is ultimately just another example of how do we shift things left? How do we find issues when they're easiest and cheapest to fix? We all realize that if I find this bug in production, that's the most expensive place for me to discover that issue. And so this is why we have QA groups, and because it's better to find it there. And then we thought, well, geez, it's even better if we as developers find it before our testers find it. So that's why we write unit tests, integration tests, smoke tests, et cetera, all these automated test suites that we run. Now, you can make a pretty strong argument, and this is actually something Rich Hickey has talked about, that it's better to just like not even have the bug there in the first place, to actually spend the time to think about how to do it without having the bug there. The moral of the story is, once the cake is baked, it's really hard to go back and change the recipe, isn't it? You're kind of stuck at that point. Now, if you're not sure how to create a pipeline, that's okay. Some folks on the Spring team have thought about this, and so they've got some ideas, some opinions. Imagine that. Now, this isn't an attempt to own your build by any stretch of the imagination. It's a build, test, stage, prod, flow. Gives you a place to start. You can, of course, modify to your heart's content. This is why, by the way, you hear a lot of this. Everything is as code today, X as code, et cetera. Before everything, we talk about everything being like as a service. Well, it's also as code. So this is where we talk about infrastructure as code, configuration as code. And what does this really boil down to? Well, we've built bridges to these other parts of our organization. We've torn down some of these walls, filled in some of these trenches. And so that does mean, in many cases, we've moved to more of a self-service model. Now, this is great for us as developers because I can get things turned around pretty quickly. Now, I remember, this is a long time ago, but we asked for a development database. Okay. Didn't need to be high availability, didn't need to be sharded. It was pretty small, 500 gigs, something like that. It's something we were just going to use in our architecture team. It took a year for them to stand us up a dev database. I still to this day don't know how that's possible. I assume they wrote a database as part of that project. That's the only reasonable way that can take that long. Now, of course, what this meant is, for much of our software careers, we had to make decisions very early on, typically when we knew the least about what was going on with our project. And so I can remember being part of some new projects, and our infrastructure folks would ask us, how much capacity do you need? And all I could do is say, I'm not really sure. And so what do we do? Well, let me see. My worst case scenario is this. So I'm going to double that, and I'm going to add a little more. And, I'm going to double it again, just in case, because I don't know how long it's going to take if I need more capacity in the future. So, I'll just do that now. And of course, anytime I've had to do this in the past, it was this multi-week, multi-month process with lots of lead time and lots of tickets, and had to go to a lot of meetings and write a lot of email. And then there was going to be some follow-up on that. And it was enough to drive you to flip a table. At one point, my wife saw this slide and she looked at me and she said, what is that? And I said, well, it's table flip. She said, it's what? I said, yeah, table flip. See, arms up in the air, tables up in the air. I actually have this as a keyboard expansion for myself, just to tell you how often I use this. And she just looked at me and shook her head and said, you have a very weird job. And I said, well, you're not wrong. Now, in the past, it was in our best interest to heavily over allocate resources. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. It was really hard to get more capacity later, right? And that means we often had single digit resource utilization. Now, I'm a big fan of the cloud. This is where I've lived now for several years. My wife would probably tell you my head's always in the cloud. I don't know. But it gives us some really interesting capabilities. I can scale up, I can scale down, I can do that all on demand. I have limitless compute with a really big asterisk at the end of it. Additional fees may apply, and those fees are often fairly opaque. I've seen lots of great tweets about this. I've been paying Amazon 80 cents a month. I spent an hour searching the console. I think I got everything, and then I just got a bill for 23 cents. Or this one made me laugh too. I took a look at the simple cost calculator, and I really want to know where the complex one is and how many instances of EC2 do I need to run it. So I took a look, and sure enough, there's a lot here. There's always been a lot here. We just were shielded from a lot of this. And I would argue this is a democratization of infrastructure. So very easy for me to just turn something on and then forget about it. It's like the seemingly limitless number of streaming services many of us have signed up for, and you don't realize you're paying $5 or $10 a month until you finally look like, wait, we're still paying for this? Like, when did that happen? This made me laugh. We dropped our cloud costs by 60% by simply turning off things we weren't using. Again, I didn't have to think about this before. My operators handled it for me. And the reality is, we now live in this paradox of choice world, which is a great book, great presentation. I recommend you take a peek at, although that's sort of like, tenured professor chic in terms of his outfit there. The downside of democratization is it demands more of all of us. And so, to paraphrase the founding fathers of the United States, well-informed developers are a prerequisite to successful cloud deployments, which does then put us in this interesting conundrum of, well, what do we want our developers focused on? I was talking to one friend of mine, and he made this comment that, hey, with this approach, your developers need to be certified in their app framework. They need to be certified in their cloud provider of choice, and they also need to be certified with their container orchestrator of choice. That's a lot of things for your developers to have to worry about. Is that really what you want them focused on? So we need to be prepared for that. We need to be aware of that. We also need to say, is this an instance of be careful what you wish for? Because yeah, we have more control. We also have more accountability. That is the other side of that coin. And so we must always remember Uncle Ben's wise words: with great power comes great responsibility. I think for the sake of time, I will end it there and hang out here and see if there's any other questions or comments, or we can just, talk about the Olympics or other interesting things.
I have a confession.
Okay.
I haven't watched it even a second.
None? You've watched none of it?
None of
NBC is
it.
very disappointed in you.
I'm un-American.
It's
I've been
okay.
busy. I've been moving, road tripping. Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. You got a legitimate excuse.
But
You really shouldn't be
what am
watching
I
the Olympics while driving. That's not cool. That's not
But the way you describe watching it, where you're trying to reverse engineer like why a rule exists, I can identify with that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I was the two that stood out to me were team handball, which my wife made the comment that it's basically take the rules from 4 or 5 sports, put them in a blender, and that's what we have. It's almost like somebody it was clearly it is a summer sport, but it's played in a gym. So I'm thinking it was cold, and people are like, well, I don't really feel like playing basketball, and I we're on the basketball court and it's too small to really play soccer. You know what? Let's throw a volleyball at each other. And, we got these nets. Let's throw them in that net. Oh, well, hang on. We got to add some other, it's amazing to me to see how much contact there is in that sport in particular. But yeah, it's fascinating, to try to understand what's really going on here. And I'm sure Wikipedia gets a ton of traffic during the Olympics as people are like, what's a scrum?
I wonder too, with some of those more obscure ones like handball or curling.
Makes me think of agile scrum.
Yes, that's where the term comes from, but I think it was a misapplication of the term. With
some of those more obscure Olympic sports, I just wonder how someone even figured out they're good at that in the first place. Yeah.
I was talking to Jasmine about that yesterday, and the one that amazes me is who sits there and says, you know what I really want to be? I want to be a pentathlete. I want to specialize in these 5 kind of obscure things. And now some of it you understand, it's like in the Winter Olympics, there's the cross-country skier and the downhill or the ski jumper. I don't remember what they call that, but that makes sense because you're not quite good enough at one of them to really be at that level. But if you combine the two, you might be good enough to do it. But I agree. It's how do you get into badminton at that level or table tennis or some of these other things where it's
badminton at least makes sense. You have it. Sorry, Tiffany. I was going to say badminton at least makes sense. You have it in your house. True. Like you can figure it. Curling though. How did you ever know to take a broom to some ice? Yeah.
I live in southern Canada essentially. That one I understand. There are curling clubs in Minnesota. I have only done it once. But yes, that is one of those where I got an idea. Let's take a granite rock and slide it down this ice alley.
So my mom's Chinese, and table tennis and / ping pong or whatever, and badminton were big things. So when I was younger, I got to play some of those because of the thing that she was doing. So I feel like it just kind of depends on that. And also we did badminton in some PE classes.
Oh, sure.
A curling spot just opened up here in Austin, and I'm going to 100% pay $35 for an intro to curling lesson. Yeah.
It's hard to keep ice in your part of the world.
It's
around
true.
Here for a couple of months a year, it's real easy.
I don't know. I'm not confident I've ever been on ice skates, but you can put it in a
building. You don't need skates. That's part of the beauty of curling. I can't,
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't even say this as a Minnesotan, but I can't skate. I never quite figured it out.
Attitude, Nate. Not with that attitude.
Well, so the problem is when I was probably 9, I lived really close to an ice rink. And so it was kind of oh, now I'm going to learn how to skate because it was, literally walking distance from my house. And so I remember one evening I went up there by myself and I was going to go skate around, and I was kind of skating along and I heard this thwack behind me, and then I heard another thwack. And I look and I realized that some of the older kids were using me as target practice with their slap shots. And so I, reversed course and left. And that was pretty much the last time I went to the skating rink, because I did not want to be the target of the older idiot kids who thought it would be cute to hit slap shots at, the young kid who can't skate and doesn't have any protective equipment on. Because, LOL, won't that be funny if we hit him with a hockey puck? So not the brightest kids I've ever encountered in my life, to say the least.
It shaped your life.
I've never learned to skate, and that's, I'm sure, part of the reason why.
Yeah. Wow.
People suck sometimes, especially
they do.
I was just having conversations recently about younger kids and just how mean they can be and the things that we've gone through.
Absolutely.
What else?
Putting your energy into a sport, so then maybe you can just ignore those things a little bit more, have a focus to get you off of it.
Absolutely. Do you know what I want to watch? I've gotten into rock climbing, specifically bouldering, at a gym. I haven't done it in a real spot yet, but I understand it's an Olympic sport now. So I did want to check that out.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And there've been a bunch of new sports added this year. And, some of them, it's just amazing to me what people can do.
Skateboarding?
Cool. Yeah, skateboarding's in there, surfing. And I'm still trying to figure out how somebody makes a skateboard go up in the air like that. It's amazing that these folks can do that.
And then land on it again afterward, not just go
right. The falling part, I'm I could do the fall. I'd hurt myself. I'd be out for a month. But the fact that they can get it up in the air, spin it around 3 or 4 times, and then land on it, and then go do another thing. It's yeah, tip of the hat. That's some serious athleticism.
Stealthy Box says competitive bouldering is so cool. I haven't actually watched it yet. People who skate are gnarly. Nothing is soft.
What blew me away about the skaters is they're not wearing any protective equipment. I thought they'd be wearing elbow pads, knee pads, a couple of more helmets, but a lot of them, they're just out there in shorts and a t-shirt. And I'm thinking, man, how many busted knees and elbows?
Scar tissue is their protective equipment.
Apparently, it just, and just think about the determination it takes to master those tricks. How many times did they fall? How many times did they oh man, I got to go to the emergency room and get a cast again? And they're I'm trying again tomorrow. Again, that level of dedication to me is pretty amazing.
I guess it's also just with figure skating, they're not wearing pads and stuff, but
True.
Maybe part of it is all the practice earlier on where hopefully they were maybe a little more padded, and then they start getting good enough that they're I know how to bail more easily.
Yeah, I guess you learn how to roll with it a little bit. I guess that's how rugby works. If you've ever seen rugby where maybe they get kind of this little ear thing on and that's about it, and they're just popping each other, and it's oh, that looks like it hurt. Yeah, I bet that did. Yeah.
Well, NFL is known for head injuries. So I guess some sports, when you sign up for them, you're just signing up for the consequences of
Fair point.
Yeah. The glorious
trade off of something you enjoy and money versus potential brain damage. Just need extra padding, but then you'll be it'll be so heavy and you'll be oh, try and run.
See, now the rugby folks argue that because they don't have all the extra padding, they actually have to use the proper technique. And so they get their head out of the way. And if you've ever seen some of the rugby athletes, they are, really, really strong people, and they're really have built up all those muscles, as their own padding. That's essentially what it boils down to. But yeah, I'm tip of my hat, because, and that's another one of those things where some of these sports pretty obscure. I don't think you're making millions of dollars doing that sport. And that's another part that I've really been amazed at, is the amount of time and dedication that you have to put in to be one of the world's best hammer throwers, to be one of the world's best table tennis players, badminton players. I'm pretty confident there's not multi-million-dollar endorsement deals as part of that, so again, that to me is remarkable that folks put in that level of time, effort, and energy, and it's amazing to watch. I mean, they make this stuff look effortless. Kudos.
According to some random thing in 2017, it says international players may make between $3,000 and $35,000 per win during regular season matches of table tennis.
Wow.
Table tennis, nice. I got a really funny mental image when he talked about football players with like a really heavy helmet. I was like a whole field full of like wobbly football players like running around.
Otherwise known as Pop Warner football.
Well, it's just like, it'd be pretty much like drunk people running around is what it would look like.
All the weight in their head, just like it being led by their head. Yeah.
I do miss being able to go out and do like sports things that I guess because like in Seattle, there's a lot of rain. So a lot of the options are indoor, and obviously the indoor options aren't really a thing right now.
Play or watch? Do you miss playing or watching?
I miss gymnastics. I miss ice skating, which I was never great at anyway, because I was stubborn and never took lessons. I want to learn hip hop, but I can't really do any of these things right now because I don't really want to be indoors with people if I can help it.
So you do gymnastics?
I did it for fun. I did like a little bit of lessons and then quit lessons after one of the other coaches walked across the tumble track when I was doing back handspring and slammed my face on his knee, and then therefore became afraid of spotters ever since, and finally got over it in Oregon. There was like adult gymnastics, so I would go every week, but like in Seattle area, there's none that I can get to without rush hour traffic during the week.
So you can do,
but yeah, it's fun. Stuff? I miss it so much. On a trampoline, yes. On the floor, no.
Still, I'm impressed. And handsprings.
Or at least I could 4 years ago. Like I went to a friend's place recently outdoors, and I was so stoked when I did front flips and landed on my feet a couple times. I was like, yes, it's been 4 years.
On the trampoline or on the ground?
Yeah.
Trampoline. Yeah.
I still can't do that on the ground either. I'll just stick to the trampoline. I don't know how to go like up enough on the floor. I'd probably go smash. Yeah.
There's a lot at stake for doing an on ground front flip. It's really the risk versus benefit ratio is really off on that for
don't miss.
Attempt it. Yeah.
Do you do gymnastics, or did you?
No. That's why I'm so interested and fascinated by the fact that you have. I think I did as a kid, but I mean, it was so long ago that it basically doesn't count anymore.
Yeah, it's the part of the Olympics I watched a little bit of.
Right on. A lot of my friends in the pandemic have gotten into like roller skating. I see a lot of that. Mm-hmm.
Nate, Bob says, nice pivotal water bottle.
Oh, look at him. Yeah, I didn't even have the logo out and he knew what I had. That's right. That's old school right there, buddy. That's right. Gotta do it.
Bob, we miss you.
Bob, I just watched, I watched some past Tanzu Tuesdays with Tiffany in preparation for this, and I watched your excellent hosting. You're an inspiration.
Yeah, I just want to tell Bob I got a tomahawk in the fridge that's going to get grilled later this week. It's got your name on it if you'd ever come visit me. But, it's fine. It's fine if you don't want to have some Wagyu. That's okay. It's okay.
Is Bob in Minnesota too?
No, he's based in California.
No, he's in California.
Right on.
I miss Bob.
Yeah, he says he knows his pivotal slag, and he's giving us hugs. And I'll need to meet you eventually in California, Bob. I met Whitney and Josh and Mario thus far in California.
Yeah, that's the weirdest thing about this last 18 months is the number of coworkers that I've not met has gone up. For most of it, it's like, well, yeah, I've hung out with all of you. And then it's like, oh, wait, I've not seen Tiffany in the flesh. Oh, I've never met Whitney in the flesh, So it just keeps adding up.
Yeah, well, until June for me, I hadn't met a single person on the team.
Did you go like a whole year on this team without meeting anybody?
More.
Yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
I started March 2020. Well, I had met one person who then left the company. So, but that
Checks
was
out.
like a manager, not like on the actual like DA team itself. But yeah, so no. But now I know 4 people because League Philly started yesterday. So yeah.
Out of context, it just sounds like you are proud that you made 4 friends in life in general.
I am so happy.
I don't know. I think 4 friends sounds about right. I'd be pretty happy if you know, I could count that many. But.
Yeah. 4 friends is great. Quality, not quantity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bob's more than enough for me.
Oh.
I'm your friend. He's
Bob's like, I'm your friend.
I miss Bob.
Come back.
See, I should have Bob on my Twitch stream. I should have him on, interview him. That'd be fun. Although we just spent the whole time like talking about our own inside stories. It'd be really fun for he and I, and it'd be like super boring for everybody else. But I think we'll have to do it anyway. So
sounds like you don't have a choice.
I think we have to now. So I've declared it on a live stream. So now it has to happen.
Yeah. And you don't need Bob's
It'll be
consent.
out there permanently.
Yeah, I'll just have Beth email Bob, and that'll just be that. We'll just schedule it. He doesn't even need to be part of it, so it's fine. It's fine. We'll do it live, Bob.
The Bob cutout that you've had this whole time. You'll bring it on screen with
He says,
you.
you know, I'm in. Yes, and
Yes, and
it.
Yeah, I got it. Yes, and Bob, do you do improv?
I haven't done improv in a little while. Yeah, Bob does improv. I was taking improv classes until like a couple months ago. So I'm like, I know this. Thanks, Nate, for talking with us today and doing your
My
awesome
pleasure.
talk and everything. This has been fun. Thanks, Whitney, for joining your first time on Tanzu Tuesday.
Yay.
Yeah, it's been super fun. Nate was a perfect first guest for me.
Well, I'm glad I could be the first guest. So that makes me feel special. So I appreciate you guys having me on. It was always fun hanging out with you guys. I wish we had more of that. So maybe we'll actually get more people on the team meeting on is it Thursday? 2 days from now? I don't know. Time has no meaning.
The guest has been on significantly more times than the host in this case. Yes.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we'll hang out.
This is my second or third time maybe on Tanzu Tuesday. I don't know. Not sure.
I think it's your third.
Third? Okay.
Yes.
Am I the first third guest? Third time? Wow.
I think so.
This is like Saturday Night Live hosts where they're like, well, you know, I've been on the show 8 times.
We'll have to get some
and
swag.
You've been stuck with me every single time.
Didn't Bob do one? I thought Bob was the host for one of them.
Bob,
but I was
Bob
on
and Paul and
so
Tiffany
still had
and
to deal
you.
with me anyway.
Got it. Okay.
Definitely not as fun when it's just me. So at least like this time you didn't have to deal with just me. Like Whitney made it better.
I think you would have been great without me here. I have confidence that it would have been riveting.
The more the merrier. It's all good either way.
Yes.
We're GDPs. It would have been fine.
Yeah.
Woo. Cool. Yeah. And everyone, again, Spring 1 is coming up. Go to spring1.io, register, attend whatever talks that you feel like attending, whenever it works. It's on Eastern time, so hopefully it helps a little bit for people in various time zones. And like I'll be emceeing the keynote on the second day of it. So if you unfortunately want to have to see me again, you can join that. So see you all next week. Thanks, everyone.
This has been
Cheers.
Tech Talks with Tiffany at 12.
On Tuesdays.
on Tuesdays, Tanzu TV. Goodbye.
Bye.